coming up. Here we go. Woohoo! Ready to roll. Already in the waiting room. Super excited to see everyone. Hey, Carolyn, you get to join us today. I like that. Awesome. Good to see you. Jim Bonnerdale's another one. Every now and then he gets to pop in. Hi, Eric. How are you? So Eric and I are going to touch bases again because we have that trip to Thailand that we are working on. That is a phenomenal trip. So I'm excited to find out and work out some more details. Got a couple more people jumping in here. Got to see Marie Louise over the weekend at an event in San Diego. Awesome. I love that doorbell. That doorbell just means more and more people just want to come jumping in here. And I will not have Sheila today. So running solo, no one's handling the behind the scenes. So bear with me. Brandon, hi, how are you? Great to see you too.
Good to see you. How you been?
Awesome. Awesome. Loving the weather here. Been flying a lot.
Nice.
So awesome. And Louise, I see you must be in the dark there, load shedding. Yeah. It's always our giveaway, right?
Yeah, how can you tell?
Yeah. All right. Hey, Jeremiah. I see all sorts of stuff coming up about commercial UAV. Nice.
Good, yeah, gearing up in a big way. So we're getting excited. Less than 2 months.
I know. And it's hard to imagine that it's already here.
Still feels like it's April, but I guess it isn't. I'm hearing.
All right, so I'm going to let a few more people in. I'll try to multitask here. And, well, I already need to start multitasking. I have a couple of announcements that I do want to make sure that I make while we're letting a few people in here. For one, I just want to do a big shout out to everyone here today. I want to thank you so much because if you remember 2 weeks ago, I had a big ask. I was getting really close to a big hurdle for me in the Coffee Connection. I have now reached 1,000 email on my list.
Wow.
We got 1,000 email addresses. I'm super excited. And part of why that is so exciting to me is because not everybody can come. So I even had, like today with our amazing guest speaker today, we have Tom Adams with us today. And I already had so many people reach out and say, you know, I just can't make it for the Coffee Connection. Where do I get to see the replay? Will it be available? And so I'm excited. Yes, we reached that goal, but I am also going to put the actual link in here for the speaker library. So if you have one that you know, I've had a spotlight speaker in the past and you were not able to attend, there are options. And again, I have to do the shout out for Johnny because Johnny is the one who does all the editing on top of the job that he does 10 hours a day, right? So I'm going to put the link to the library in there. And if you want to go back and view any of the past spotlight speakers, they're all up there. And that's for the past 3 years. Awesome, right? So I want to do a big shout out. Thank you for helping me reach that goal. Also really quick, I have some speakers coming up that I want to do a shout out for. We have Shern Peters next week. He's going to be sharing about AAM training. He's got a company called Manco, and so you don't want to miss that. And then if you're familiar with Canva, or if you're not, we have a guest speaker coming up that's going to help us with some marketing ideas, tips, and tricks for working with Canva, and that's Brenda. And then we also have Edward coming up with Zismo Media, and he's going to share about a situation, a lawsuit that he's worked through and won with New York City. He's got a promotional company. So amazing guest speakers coming up. I'm super excited. So that's a perfect segue over to the guest speaker that we have today, right? I am excited. I know that's why you're here. You're not here to see me. You're here to see him. We have Tom Adams, and he is a retired from the FBI after 20 years of service. He retired in 2022 of October. And Tom's last 3 years at the FBI were spent as a supervisor special agent in the counter UAS program. He has worked with a team developing training policies and procedures and operational standards. He led numerous high-profile counter UAS missions throughout the U.S. at the nation's highest profile sporting cultural events. And that includes protecting our government's highest ranking officials and critical infrastructure. He's the CEO of AeroVigilance, a counter UAS training consulting service company, and at CUAS Hub, which is an online resource for counter UAS and airspace awareness. So we're super excited and honored to have you here with us today, Tom. Thank you so much for sharing. And I know you have a very tight schedule. You are booked on presentations.
Yeah, it's been a busy day. Thanks for the introduction. I really appreciate it. It's good to be here as part of the crew. A lot of people in here. Congratulations on your 1,000 newsletter subscribers. That's an amazing accomplishment.
Oh, thank you. I'm excited. And we are thrilled to have you here today. And like I had mentioned before, I'll go ahead and handle behind the scenes and let people in. So if you want to just share with us and kind of get us started with how you got into the counter UAS and where you see this going.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. How did I get here? I have no idea how I got here. It's just kind of my, you know how you get to, 20 years ago, if I thought I would be doing this today, we're crazy. But so as you mentioned, I retired from the FBI back in October. And for the first part of my FBI career is investigating white collar crimes, public corruption, and such in various parts of the U.S. I eventually, back in 2008, graduated from the FBI's Hazardous Devices School and became a bomb technician, and had the opportunity to train and work with bomb technicians and professionals from around the world. Traveled to places like Afghanistan, Turkey, Senegal, Nigeria, different places like that, and serving in a role as a special agent bomb technician. I eventually took a supervisor job at headquarters and was in our 24/7 command operations center, and I was working a night shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. And I was going to be doing this for an 18-month time frame. And so I always wanted to get a graduate degree, and this was the time to do it. And so been spending some time trying to figure out what I wanted to study, and I eventually came across Embry-Riddle's unmanned systems program, and got into the unmanned systems world and a lot of doors in the FBI. After my spending some time in the operations center, they actually moved me into a supervisory special agent bomb technician, where I was working with the National Explosive Task Force. And then when my temporary duty was done, it was an 18-month temporary duty up at headquarters, I went back to the Richmond office, was continuing to do bomb technician work and helping the counter ID unit select and do some training related to the bomb technicians' use of drones for critical response type activities. It was at that time that an opportunity came open. The FBI has had a counter drone type program since 2016, and they opened up a position for another program manager, supervisor, special agent. So I applied for the job and was fortunate enough to get it. And that job really opened a whole different world to me that I really didn't even know that it existed, really. I didn't really understand what I was getting into, but it didn't take me very long. We were covering a lot of high profile events and venues. So I can't really talk about everywhere that we were at, but the DOJ did put a press release out there a couple of years ago that basically says, we're at Super Bowl, World Series, Washington, D.C., 4th of July, and things like the Rose Bowl. So we're covering a lot of high profile events in a security specialty that really doesn't have a it's new and emerging. So there wasn't like a book that I could read or a technical guide or go to some, amazing training course that would teach me everything I needed to know. We had to carefully apply the responsibilities and the ability to use certain technical measures that a lot of other agencies and entities couldn't use, and use them in a responsible way so that we could begin to learn lessons and learn how to deploy this technology safely, effectively, and do it in a way that doesn't increase the risk to the critical infrastructure assets or people that were there to try to protect to begin with. And so it was the 3 years I was in the program, 3+ years I was in the program, I learned so much. And one of the reasons that I left at my 20-year mark when I was eligible is I wanted to be able to take some of this knowledge and information and experience and be able to educate and expand the knowledge base of the private sector, which is really kind of one of the main things that we were doing. One of my teammates left the FBI a few months before I did and started AeroVigilance. It was something that we had talked about, but it was something that I couldn't really participate in until I retired. And once I retired, I became the other co-founder of the company. And so on the AeroVigilance side, we're doing training, consulting, services type work related to counter drone stuff. But one of the big things that we built right away was we built an online resource called CUAS Hub. It's cuashub.com. And our goal was to, there isn't a lot of information out there about counter UAS, and it's certainly not consolidated all into one location. As me and my FBI work partner, we're driving around the US and conducting this mission all around. It was hard for us to find, a central place where we could find all this information. And so one of our ideas was like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if, and so we actually took that idea and built a website. That's really the first thing we did as soon as I retired from to the end of December, when the website actually was released into the wild. We built a structure for a website, and that's been one of the big things we've been working on in addition to building our consulting company, was building that website. And we've got news articles. We've consolidated a whole bunch of guides, resources, white papers, theses, all these different things from around the world all into kind of one place. And we're constantly adding new stuff almost every day, probably six days a week. We're putting out new content. We try to take a bit of a break on Sunday, but it's been a great learning experience. And we're just really hoping to help bridge that knowledge gap and help people to be more knowledgeable about the subject, because in the end, that knowledge will help them to be able to make better decisions for their whatever they're trying to do, whatever the purpose is, whether they just want to learn more, or they want to help build their policies and procedures for their critical infrastructure or agency or department or whatever. So that's really what we've been doing.
So I placed the link to that website into our chat if anybody wanted to take a look at that, and so they can see some of the amazing work that's being done there. Can you share it with us a little bit more? So I know your focus was more about, the outreach, the educational platform of what is needed for Homeland Security. Can you maybe share a little bit more with us on that line?
Yeah, so when it comes to, building the educational base to be able to do this, we sometimes call it the Airspace Awareness and Protection Mission, because counter UAS sometimes can have some negative connotations for some people, but building the knowledge base for this mission is really important. And one of the things that really helped me and others that I've worked with as we've come into this emerging security specialty is being, and I mean this in a very good way because I'm one myself, is being a drone nerd and understanding the technological capabilities of drones and understanding drone behavior and drone pilot behavior, understanding not only the commercial off the shelf, but also the custom built and some of the other types of platforms that are built for more specialized commercial operations. Understanding all that type of information is really important. So for example, as part of our mission, we had the authority and that authority was not a blanket authority. It was for specific times, places, and locations. We could mitigate drones that we believed to be a credible threat to the asset or venue that we're trying to protect. And understanding how that mitigation technology may impact the national airspace is an important consideration when we're conducting those missions. So if you don't know what could happen with that drone, if you were to mitigate a drone, if you believe that you had a reason to mitigate that drone, if you don't understand what the potential impacts of that action may be, then you really don't have any business pressing that proverbial red button. You have to really understand it. So for example, as a lot of you know, because I know we have a whole bunch of drone nerds, and again, I mean that very affectionately, you guys know that depending on the drone make and model, when you interrupt that signal between the ground control station to the drone, that drone could crash, it could hover, it could land, it could raise up to a certain predetermined height to try to reacquire the signal, or it might return home. And in doing so, it may actually begin to endanger other crewed and uncrewed aircraft in the national airspace. And so you have to really, tackle this problem from a very strong knowledge base. Otherwise, you're going to end up in a situation that you really didn't want to have to begin with, because we don't want to do more harm in conducting this mission than maybe what the drone would be itself. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of the angle that we're looking at. But as we started to build our own training program with the FBI, you have to learn about a wide variety of different things. You have to understand the drone threats. You have to understand kind of the history of drones and the different types of drone detection, and if you're authorized to use it, the different types of mitigation equipment, the risks, and how to set up and use and troubleshoot that equipment is another really important aspect of it too. So that it's very wide-based, very wide variety of topics that you really need to understand. You kind of have to be a jack of all trades. In our case, when we would go operate at a location, there wasn't gear already there, so we had to bring our gear. We had to find locations to set it up where the equipment would be successful. We had to network it all together. We had to troubleshoot networks. We had to be able to fly drones in order to test our equipment to make sure that it's working appropriately. So we all had to be Part 107 pilots, kind of be a Swiss Army knife. So it's very technically oriented, but we had to really have a basic understanding of a wide variety of topics.
Understandable how implementing something can cause a secondary panic. I could see how that would happen, and with the unknown as to what's happening. Can you share a little bit more about the training that's involved? It sounds so in depth, and so can you share a little bit more about how the applicants and such would go through that training?
Well, so right now there's not like a national. So, and I'll kind of back up a little bit on the public safety bomb technician side of things. I mentioned that I went through the FBI's hazardous devices school. Every single public safety bomb technician in the United States goes to that one school in Huntsville, Alabama. The basic course is 6 weeks. The basic certification course is 6 weeks, and everybody goes through this consistently taught program. And so if you have a graduate of the program, let's say you have somebody from the Seattle Police Department and you have somebody from the New York Police Department, I can take someone from the Seattle Police Department, put them in the New York Police Department bomb squad, and they could go out and handle an incident. And they're going to be using the same technology, for the most part, the same technologies, but the same tactics, techniques, and procedures, and the same safety measures. And when it comes to counter UAS, whether it's just detection capabilities or you have the authority to use mitigation capabilities, I think it's going to be really important that we have a consistent method in which these technologies are employed throughout the United States, whether it's at an airport or a non-airport environment, or you have mitigation authority. You can't, depending on the mission, you might have different mitigation rules of engagement, but we should all be operating the same way, because if you have people using it differently outside of the kind of the normal use cases of how this technology is supposed to be used, it's going to cause problems for the national airspace, which is going to impact not only crewed aircraft, but uncrewed aircraft. So I think consistency is going to be really important. And, as of right now, that school hasn't been built yet. I'm fortunate enough to be on the UAS Detection and Mitigation Aviation Rulemaking Committee that just started back in May. Although we can't, talk about all of our deliberations, but those are some of the things that we often talk about is what are some of those requirements that are going to be important as this, new security specialty begins evolving and expanding more throughout the United States.
That is such a key. And I hear it all across the different industries that there needs to be a set standard of training. And that is just such a key. So I realize there's things that you probably are not at liberty to share with us, but it would be very interesting to know a little bit more about how does the system actually work? Is it an autonomous system? And then how does that process actually work as far as detecting the drones that are in the air and mitigating the risks?
Yeah, so when it comes to the systems, there's basically two main categories of systems. You've got detection systems, which include EOIR cameras, acoustic sensors, radars, and radio frequency detection systems. For the most part, like the cameras, acoustic sensors, and radars, you're not going to run afoul of any, legal issues. But when it comes to radio frequency detection systems, right now, there are some RF detection systems that might violate provisions of Title 18. So that's something to keep in mind. On the mitigation side, you've got kinetic and non-kinetic measures. An example of a kinetic measure might be a hunter capture net drone or a shotgun net or some sort of a airburst munition or some sort of a physical means that's used to take down a drone. An example of a non-kinetic measure may be a jammer, like a barrage jamming system that looks to disconnect the signal between the ground control station and the drone, or maybe some sort of a cyber takeover measure. So there are some types of drones that may be able to be, basically reprogrammed and moved to a specified landing zone where it can then be further assessed for a threat by a bomb squad or some other type of specialty. But those are some of the main categories. For the mitigation type systems, one of the most important things in order to be able to mitigate a drone, you got to be able to detect, track, identify that drone and understand what it is. One of the things that a lot of people get focused on is that, they want to be able to have the authority and the technology available to be able to mitigate a drone, to, disrupt, disable, or destroy a drone that they believe to be a credible threat. However, being able to detect a drone and be able to understand where the pilot is located is a great mitigation technique, because if somebody's flying in airspace in which they are not authorized, for example, there's a temporary flight restriction, being able to find that pilot and asking him or her to land the drone, and typically that's and least lowest liability ways that you can rise drone from the airspace. So that's typically the one that we focused on more than anything. And mitigation measures should always be used as a resort when some of those other options might not be available. So the mitigation shouldn't be the first thing that you go to unless circumstances warrant it. That's kind of your first method. But kind of going back to the training stuff of it, part of it too is that when it comes to doing this mission, having the same knowledge as a Part 107 pilot is really important, because having that understanding of the airspace rules is really important, so that you understand what is normal, what is not normal, what is correct, what is not correct. I think it's going to be a big thing. And as drones proliferate more across the United States, our state and local law enforcement, are they going to have to become more knowledgeable in what's normal and what's not normal? And are they going to have some authorities to be able to, to enforce different, whether it's a local law, state law, or whatever? It's going to be interesting to see how it evolves, because right now, most law enforcement personnel don't know a lot about the airspace rules because they haven't really had to. And is that something that we want to add on to their plate because they already have a really, really full plate right now of a lot of things that they have to know and be aware of and trained on. So it's going to be interesting to see how this evolves.
Yes, yes, it will. So I imagine you have had several regulatory hurdles that you have overcome, and you probably see many in the future. Can you share some of the ones that you feel that you've overcome?
Yeah, so, when I was doing this mission for the federal government, we had to meet a number of different hurdles per the legislation in order to be able to deploy and use this equipment. So as I mentioned before, we didn't have a blanket authority to use the equipment whenever and wherever we want. There are, there are issues with using some of this equipment. It might impact the safety of the national airspace. It might impact the integrity of the communication spectrum. There are some types of equipment that might implicate some privacy and civil liberty concerns. And so we always had to take all of those things into consideration. But in order to really conduct this mission effectively, you have to have a place where your flight is restricted. If somebody's flying in Class G airspace, there's really not a need for for a robust counter drone airspace awareness and protection. Maybe some some knowledge or understanding of what is around you, but having some sort of restricted airspace was always a big component. And then a lot of the systems like radars, you can't just use wherever you want. You have to have a temporary authority to be able to deploy certain types of equipment in certain areas. And so there's always a lot of things like as the use of this equipment expands, it's going to be very heavily regulated. You're not going to be able to see somebody just decide to use the counter drone equipment, certain types of counter drone equipment, just anywhere. If it's it could potentially impact the national airspace or communication spectrum. That's going to be heavily regulated by those regulatory agencies, and probably some either at the state level or potentially the federal level. That's going to be looked at very carefully from that end. So it'd be interesting to see how this plays out. There's a lot of pending legislation right now where there might be some expansion of authorities. And we kind of wait to see how these next couple months filter out and just see what happens.
It's the waiting game at this point. So as so many different aspects of this industry, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
How much of this system is dependent upon AI or ML?
As you mentioned that, it reminded me of a question you mentioned earlier that I didn't answer. We talked about some of the autonomy of some of these systems. So some of the detection systems are able to give you alerts when drones are detected flying within a certain area that you might predetermine. So that capability is out there. AI ML is going to be a big part of this technology. For example, there are a lot of EOIR cameras that have a software backbone that is analyzing the pixels, and it's looking for things that are very similar to an aircraft. Same thing with some of the RF detection or even radar technologies may have some of that AI ML background. So I think it's going to be really important. They're also using it to determine to look for indications of flight behavior to determine whether or not that drone may or may not be a threat. Obviously, it might not be 100%, but it can give you some indications of what might be nefarious type of activity. I know some of that stuff is being used overseas in some conflicts, and then some of those types of things can be applied in this context too. I know when we were doing a lot of missions, we spending hours and hours and days in unmarked white security vans in and around different venues, you kind of start to pick up things. And we always had a saying, it was kind of funny, we did it to pass the time, but we called it sunset hard hands time after that Taco Bell commercial. But like from about 5 p.m. to 7 p.m., 8 p.m. in certain areas, that's when people were flying their drones to get sunset pictures. So we call it sunset hard hands time. And we always knew where a lot of those people were flying. So we just ourselves were using kind of some of those same techniques to understand what the drones were doing and at what times. And sometimes we could tell what their behavior was, based on, different things that we picked up from the environment. So it's going to be a big part of this mission going forward.
Oh, Yes, that's a great way to term it too. You start
Yeah.
to see the algorithms, right?
Yeah, you can use the sunset hard hands time for when you want to go get sunset pics with your drones. All good.
There we go. Also, I just want to remind everybody, if you have any questions or anything, you're welcome to throw those into the chat. And while you're typing away, I do have a few more questions that I would love to go through. Oh, it looks like Jim has one. Did you want to go ahead and put that into the chat or open up?
No, I really got a comment. Hi, Desi, and thank you for, I really enjoy these sessions. They're very valuable. But I'm a member of the InfraGard, and I had 36 years Navy. And the training thing, Desi asked that question. What are you going through for training? So, you know, being a FBI guy, and I work with the FBI, and, you know, the Coast Guard's buying them, the FBI's buying drones and stuff like that. But, you know, when my nephew was at the Paris Island for Marine Corps boot camp, you don't become a sharpshooter firing an M16 gun just your first time. I mean, it takes a lot of practice. Okay. And same thing with a Indy 500 race car driver. I mean, you don't just put somebody who's just been in the classroom and then just put them in a race car and expect them to win the Indianapolis 500. So this training and experience is a very vital component of all of this. So when you go to Huntsville, Alabama, which I've been to, you know, what kind of regiment are you experiencing? Is it just classroom? I mean, I was an instructor at graduate school. There's some people that like to read books. Some people like to listen to lectures, but to become really good, you have to practice, practice, practice. So do you have any kind of sign off that says that you're qualified or not qualified or something like that? To explain your training a little bit more.
Yeah. So when you say my training, you know, I can't what maybe DHS or DOJ are working on now, but understanding kind of what things were when I left. Some of the training systems that we built, it's a combination of classroom and practical exercises. That's really the you know, the first step, because everybody, as we all know, we're all, you know, adult learners, and we all learn differently. Some people do good reading books, some people like to watch videos, and some people like combinations of, you know, practical exercises and stuff like that. And so I think the practical exercise piece is going to be really important, and especially taking situations where you know, I'll tell you, when we were doing this mission, there were times when mistakes were made, nothing that was that was catastrophic or, you know, anything that caused any issues, but where we could have done things differently or better. And I tell you, I learned more from those types of situations than I did from when we were succeeding or when we succeeded. Because if you don't know why you were successful, it's almost kind of like a wasted experience. And so I kind of take that from times when we made mistakes or things that we could have done differently, and driving that long drive back to Virginia, where we're like, hey, what could we have done differently? And, you know, after one of the events that we covered in Tampa, we had an issue with kind of the crew resource management of how we conducted the mission. And by the time we got back to Virginia, we had basically almost written a crew resource, an aviation type crew resource management strategy that we employed in future missions. That was really important. So I think having a wide variety of, you know, classroom combined with very valuable, you know, situations and, you know, that type of stuff is going to be really important, so that people can start to learn some of those lessons that those of us that have been doing this without a training, you know, without a robust or a certification program, have had to learn along the way. So I think it will help increase that learning curve by 3 to 4 years, just by having some really good, you know, scenario-based situations you can work through.
Set of standards. Have it across the industry. That way everyone is educated on the same level. It's fantastic. As far as the system itself, how do you plan to, looking ahead, there's so many home built drones. How do you handle that type of situation? And I know they're just going to be expanding because of technology and just the power that people have in that technical age of building drones. So how do you plan to handle that moving forward?
Well, I mean, a lot of the systems right now are already accounting for the fact that that there are different frequencies that might be used by the homemade drones, with things like radar. And if you have a camera, especially a camera with AI ML technology, it doesn't matter what frequency the drones is going to be on. In fact, those types of technologies, as drones become less reliant on traditional radio frequency technology for command and control, I think some of those physical detection type systems, radar, camera, and acoustic, are going to become more important. But a lot of the technologies, a lot of the drone, counter drone equipment manufacturers, especially the RF detection or the RF based mitigation systems, are already taking into account the homemade drone phenomenon. There's a lot of homemade drones out there. So yeah, it's a big part of their strategy.
So Carolyn has posted a question into our chat. She says, "Hi, Tom. Are you able to speak about the large capacity events where AeroVigilance services would be a plus to the ground security teams, and how they coordinate among these groups, and how are they strategized?"
Yeah, so we have post FBI, we have covered some events, some larger scale events with authorized drone detection equipment, as well as the other thing that we've been doing too is a lot of drones are being used more in some of these sporting events and venues and things like that. And so when you have public safety drones and maybe some media drones up there getting some shots and stuff, what we're finding is that a lot of these venues aren't really aware of any FAA rules and regulations. The pilots, if they are even Part 107 certified, they're not coordinating how they fly, where they fly. Especially if you consider something like a horse race, there's places where you don't want drones to be flying because it could spook the horse. So one of the things that we've been doing, in addition to the drone detection stuff, which I'll talk about in a minute, is airspace coordination. We come in and we'll help these venues establish the rules for the drone pilots that will be authorized to fly, where they can and can't go, making sure that they have the Part 107 certificate and all this other stuff that we'll kind of do from that side. And then on the drone detection side, using authorized drone technology, we'll be able to coordinate and work with the venue internal security as well as local law enforcement outside of the venue to be able to find the drone pilots that might be violating that restricted airspace. We're generally operating in areas where there is a flight restriction, and so that we do have some sort of a way to keep people out, or at least some sort of teeth to say, hey, you shouldn't be flying here. And most of the time it's just, educate, catch and release. You educate them. Unfortunately, we have a lot of drone pilots who just aren't aware of the rules, like a lot of us on this phone call are. They're just not aware of them at all. So those are some of the things that we do. We're kind of taking a fraction of our FBI mission that we're able to do that we can do legally outside of the Bureau, and then we're adding in that airspace awareness and coordination, which is going to be pretty big, I think, because it's just, as I mentioned before, like local law enforcement are still not aware of all the airspace rules and regulations. A lot of these venues are not aware of that kind of stuff also.
Public awareness is such a key, and just having everybody aware of what those regulations are, and it puts a safeguard on, they know what is allowed to be in that area or not allowed in that area, and it puts a element of confidence in it as well. Carolyn has said, excellent, thank you. So I would like to know, what is your need? Obviously, regulatory is always the first thing that somebody would say, but do you have a need that you would have to have in place to see this really expand and just really be out there for the aspect of Homeland Security and such like that? What would be your need?
Yeah, I think there's two things. There's basically two stages. One of the things that I think needs to be done, hopefully in this round of legislation that's going on right now, is, as I mentioned before, there are certain radio frequency detection technologies that may violate provisions of Title 18 of federal law, which an example would be wiretap or pen trap trace, where the system is decoding that RF signal and extracting information from that signal. So if you're pulling the drone's telemetry information, the location of the pilot, the location of the drone, the altitude, the speed, all that kind of stuff, that could be information that pulling that information may violate federal law. Because a lot of these laws were built some of these laws were made, decades ago. This is Tom's opinion, is that drone telemetry information should not be, it shouldn't be something that we should have limitations around. For example, most crewed aircraft are broadcasting ADS-B. We've got remote ID coming out, where most drones, with the exception of recreational under 250 grams, are going to be broadcasting some of that same information. So in my opinion, one of the first things that needs to happen is that critical infrastructure, law enforcement, government, whoever, corporate security, need to be able to employ RF detection equipment and be able to do it where it doesn't violate federal law. So being able, eliminating that kind of that decoding thing that I talked about would be really important for a first step in our homeland security. These drone detection systems are not, it's not getting data from your phone, or it's not pulling, your pictures. It's not looking at your emails or texts. They're looking at telemetry information between the ground control station and the drone. And to me, for the safety and security of the national airspace, I think that's going to be really important. So that's the one big thing. The next big thing that I agree with is that we need to slowly start expanding mitigation authorities out to state and local entities, and doing it in a very slow and controlled manner. What they've proposed is having 12 state and local law enforcement agencies per year for the next 5 years that would go through a joint, probably would be a joint DOJ, DHS type of school, where they build the curriculum, they build in the training requirements, they build in the certification requirements, all the different scenarios and different things that need to happen. And they start to teach other entities to do this mission safely and securely in the national airspace. I think that's a big step. And, we're going to continue to learn more as we expand the use of these systems, that we can then feed back into that intelligence cycle and feed back into the training cycle, where we can continue to adjust the training to make it more effective, safer, and such, and be able to, further expand the use of this technology.
It is a key. It's imperative to get that aspect into it. You mentioned actually critical infrastructure. So in a scenario when you're out in the field and there's a outage or something of that effect, how does that affect your mission?
You're talking about with the use of technology, I'm guessing?
Yes.
Yeah, if you don't have a backup power source, then your systems may not work. You'd be, back to the old-fashioned visual or audio detection of drones. I will say that the visual detection of drones is often very, it can be inaccurate at times, especially at night. If you go out at night and you look at blinking lights in the sky, it's difficult to tell how far away those blinking lights are. Is it a aircraft that's 40 miles away at 20,000 feet, or is it a drone that's 800 feet away at 300 feet? It's very difficult to tell. And then when you add in other things like low Earth orbit objects like a satellite or a space station, and we've even had planets mistaken for drones. It does happen, but I'm here to say that the visual detection stuff can often be very inaccurate.
So true. The FAA has a whole section on that, visual illusions at night, right? And
Yeah.
they can play tricks on you. They can play tricks on you in the daytime, and that's why it's development, right? Definitely implement that into the training aspect of it. Looks like we have another question that just popped up into our chat, and I know we're getting near the end here. So what is the roadmap, the future, looking like for Homeland Security / FBI?
Related to counter drone, that's an interesting question. The Department of Homeland Security has a very robust counter drone program. They have DHS S&T, which is doing a lot of research in a lot of various areas, in urban areas, and looking at, mitigation, being able to safely mitigate in the national airspace, or looking at swarm things. So the DHS is really doing a lot. They've got, different sub entities that are out doing counter UAS missions right now: Secret Service, Customs Border Protection, Federal Protective Service, et cetera. So they've got a very robust program. For DOJ, the DOJ program isn't as large as DHS, but I think, I will say that within the interagency, DOJ, DHS, FA, the FCC, and all these other agencies that have a stake in the airspace awareness and protection of the U.S., they all work very well together in the interagency space. So I think that's a great thing for us. What's ahead for DOJ? That's a good question. I'm not really sure. Depending on the different pieces of legislation that you look at, there's one of the pieces of legislation that says that the DOJ or the FBI should build the training program kind of in a similar way. I think the idea is that a counter drone mitigation training program would be modeled a lot after the FBI's hazardous devices school training program, which is a proven effective model that effectively and consistently trains bomb techs around the United States. You take that same model and you do that thing for counter drones. So it'll be interesting to see. I think the next few months will really determine what the DOJ's role is going to be in this counter UAS mission. I think DHS is always going to be very solidly in place in this mission, but I'm kind of curious myself to see what the DOJ's future looks like, and how much they want to be involved, or how much the legislation allows them to be involved in this mission. How's that for a dancing around sort of thing?
Did a great job. We have another question popped up into our chat. Do you think or consider that drones and CUAV systems are in a nascent or very much matured stage?
Interesting. So, one of the things I think is going to be really interesting, something that I'm kind of looking at, is as counter drone technology is always going to be evolving, as is drone technology. So, one of the things that counter drone activities are going to have to be a part of that overall integration of drones in the national airspace. So when it comes to advanced air mobility, urban air mobility, uncrewed aircraft systems, traffic management, all those different types of things, counter UAS is going to have to exist as part of that, that infrastructure. And so I think the counter drone and drone technology areas are going to have to be very, very much engaged. And on the, FAA UAS detection and mitigation arc, those are some of the things that are come up as topics. But we're going to have to really be very, we're going to have to really work together, because we have to be a part of that infrastructure. And I'm not really sure how that's going to work out just yet, but it's something that people are really starting to talk about, especially over the last 6 months.
It has to be implemented, and it has to be ahead of the game. We can't be trying to do a catch up as we're going through this technology. And we need to make sure that we're advancing as we go through. We are just about out of time. I know you have other meetings ahead. And so I'd like to just wrap up with maybe giving you an option for your one last thoughts that you'd like to share with the audience that are here today. And then we'll wrap it up so that everyone can have an opportunity to get ready for their next meetings.
Yeah, no, it's great. I think the big thing that that's really been clear to me is when we start increasing the number of counter drone or counter UAS professionals. I think a lot of our people that are going to come fill the ranks and to help us chart our path forward are going to come from the drone sector. I think having a knowledge of drones, drone behavior, drone technology, whatever that may be, drone pilots. I think those are some of the people that are going to really make a mark in this sector. As I mentioned before, I think having that drone nerd knowledge is going to be really important. So I think that's one thought I would leave people with, which is kind of tying into the website, which we mentioned in the beginning, cuashub.com. That we built that website for people to go and learn more, and we're getting a lot of people from the drone industry, the counter drone industry, academia, law enforcement, public safety, defense, all those, we're getting a pretty large international audience. So if you're interested in learning more, go to the website. Feel free to reach out to me if you ever have any questions or anything I can do for you. I'm happy to have conversations with people. I really wanted to, make sure that that people have a way to understand and learn more about it. So I guess that's a big thing is just, we'd love to start seeing people coming from the drone industry. It's going to be a big part of our industry.
I did put the link in there again. There's so many amazing articles that you have written that are there, and just doing more of that public awareness. It's great. So I encourage everyone to go check that out. I did put that in there. And so with that, we are about 10 minutes to the top of the hour. And so I do want to say thank you very much, Tom, for joining us today, giving us all that insight and knowledge about Homeland Security, counter UAS. It's such a valuable need. And a lot of thank yous popping up into the chat there. And so with that, we'll go ahead and shut this program down so that others can go run and get ready for the next one. And Tom, I know you are one of those people back meetings today.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. A lot of thank yous going into the chat there. We really appreciate your time and coming and joining us. That kind of wraps it up.